Welcome to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, the podcast for high achievers who want to stay sharp, focused, and full of energy despite their diagnosis. With your host, National Board Certified Functional Medicine Health Coach, Julie Michelson, where Julie helps you take your power back from autoimmunity. And now here's your host, Julie Michelson.
Welcome back to the Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast. I'm your host, Julie Michelson, and today I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. James Howton. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet, Julie.
I always love to start off with a little icebreaker. So what is, don't be nervous. You get to choose your response. What is something that most people or maybe many people might not know about you? Just a fun fact.
Great. Instead of a medical question, huh?
Yes.
When I grew up in Colombia in South America, came to the States when I was 15. Most people don't know that.
I would imagine most people don't.
Sometimes they pick up in a little accent or something, but they can't usually place where it comes from.
I actually had that experience when I first met you. So that is a good one. Many of the guests that I have on the podcast have their own personal health journey that's led them to the functional medicine world. And I know that that's not the case for you. So tell us a little bit about how you went from a traditional Western family medicine practice to practicing functional medicine.
Maybe I was curious. The whole traditional season was a great season, and I was privileged to be in a small town and got to do the whole cradle to grave thing, from delivering babies to covering the ER, taking care of grandma in the nursing home. And so that I loved it. It was a fun time. But over time, medicine started becoming about productivity, and I would round on people before family would get there in the morning. And, you started getting pushed 10-minute visits. And at some point it hit me like, I was handing out prescriptions all day long and started feeling like, if people would ask me, how can I be healthier? How can I improve my health? I was like, I don't know that I had a whole lot to offer them. I could patch up things well, and the acute care part of medicine was great, but it was sort of kind of a little coming to sort of midlife thing of, hey, is this really what I signed up for? And so that's started a journey of looking for better ways of doing things and being open-minded. And when people would come in and say, hey, what about saw palmetto for my prostate? I would say, well, let's try it and remeasure levels in, a few weeks. And the more I did that, the more I started seeing that, hey, there are things outside of my conventional toolbox that actually worked, and that made me more curious, and, just kind of propelled it. Once you get hooked on that root cause approach, it's kind of hard to go back.
That is very, very true. I know from your bio that you started working with bioidentical hormones back in the mid-90s. Is that accurate? That seems early to me, as far as, seems like you were maybe a little bit ahead of the curve. How did that play in? Yeah. How did that happen? How do you all of a sudden become one of the early adopters? Something like that. It
was maybe that sort of mindset, and maybe it ties to the whole thing of growing up in another country and seeing that there's more than one way of doing things, and kind of being that never fitting in one world. And so, when I think I came across an article one time on depression in men and testosterone levels, and I remember pulling the charts of guys that I had on SSRIs and looking at hormone levels, and lo and behold, there was a good number of people that had really hormonal issues, and when you address them, they were able to get off their medications. And so it made me curious about hormones. And at the time, A4M was sort of a fairly new group, and went to some other courses, and it made sense that all the prescriptions that I was writing for Premarin and those types of hormones, that didn't make as much sense as the bioidentical hormones that our body was making ever since we were teenagers. And so it just propelled the transition, and the more I played with it, the more, the better people did. And, it just, again, it's hard to look back from there.
There's so much in there that I want to unpack. I want to circle back to what are bioidentical hormones and what is the difference? You mentioned Premarin, but before I do that, share with our listeners, obviously my focus is autoimmunity. Why am I having you on talking about hormones? What is this connection between, why should they care? Why are their hormones important? And because I'm going to give you a lot of things to talk about. And what hormones are you talking about? I know you mentioned testosterone in men. Maybe some of us have different ideas when we hear hormones of exactly what you're talking about.
Hormones are kind of one of those things, by no means am I saying that they're the thing with autoimmunity, but, we in a functional medicine model, we still look at all the things that we look at, right? From gut health to food sensitivities, to toxins, to mindset, to all those things that play into it. But hormones are often kind of ignored. And so when you ask me about, hey, what would you contribute, the thought with hormones is, hey, it's something that commonly, and we'll get into it, commonly gets ignored and commonly gets blamed on other things and just not addressed properly. And I find that it makes a huge difference when we're treating autoimmunity.
I definitely agree, having had my own personal experiences with hormones and autoimmunity. But also I say to my clients all the time, doctor after doctor can't connect the dots for them, or they always say, the week around my cycle, my pain is worse. They know, like they can tell they feel worse. There's a connection. And so often, they're not addressed, as you said. And I do think it is the missing piece, or a missing piece. I know we talk about all the time, I talk about all the time, nutrition and diet and detox and stress management and sleep and the proper movement levels. But so many, and those are things that almost everybody talks about if they're taking, a whole health approach to autoimmunity, but not necessarily hormones. True.
And so following up on what is a bioidentical hormone? I remember with residents when they would rotate through it's the idea of it's the same molecule that our bodies made, and so use the example of Premarin. Premarin comes from pregnant mare urine. So it's a bioidentical hormone for horses, but we still use it. It's still widely used in America.
Premarin is, for those that don't know,
it's an estrogen. It's a prescription estrogen that gets used for menopause symptoms, and
made from horse urine.
And is made from horse pee. You have catheterized horses sitting there in a, and they're distilling and extracting their estrogen out of their urine. And so that's not a bioidentical hormone. In the old days, we would use pig insulin for diabetics, and it would save people's lives. And it was wonderful. Right. And then when labs could synthesize a bioidentical human insulin, then, hey, nobody would dream of using pig insulin anymore.
Why would you still use that? Right.
So it's fascinating with sex hormones that we still have a number of hormones being used for men and women that don't look at all like our natural hormones. And so the first step is, hey, we're talking about bioidentical, not just hormones, any hormone out there.
And you mentioned sex hormones specifically, but I know, especially with autoimmunity, there's some other hormones that, I know personally, because full disclosure, Dr. Howton is my doctor. So I know what you look for. I know what you look at and how you address those issues. But more commonly, I think if somebody with autoimmunity is to get a smaller panel, they're hopefully, although if it's not a functional medicine panel, even something like thyroid might not be fully complete.
I know you cover that in a lot with people. So when I think of hormones, I like the concept of a symphony. And so in that symphony, I think of sex hormones as in there's 2-3 estrogens that we have in our body. There's progesterone, testosterone. Those are kind of the 3 biggies. We think of adrenal hormones like cortisol and DHEA. We think of hormones like pregnenolone. And we think of thyroid hormones like, free T4, free T3, TSH, thyroid antibodies. And then we think of neurotransmitters, which all kind of symptoms of all of those sort of overlap. And I tell people, many people that come in the office have, I read about adrenals, or I read about X, Y, and Z, and they did the right things. And I tell them it's kind of like taking a symphony and fine-tuning the strings perfectly, did the right thing. But if you ignore percussion or other parts of the symphony, the music may still sound crappy. And so that sort of
may still feel crappy.
Yeah, exactly. And people think, oh, crap, I didn't do the right thing. And then they move on to the next thing, the next book, the next specialist that does thyroid, and they do all the right things for thyroid, but if they're ignoring adrenals, they still don't function optimally. And so the whole point with the functional medicine approach is we want to address the whole symphony.
Well, I love that. I think it's the only way to do it. It's the right way to do it. So I brought up this idea of, I see all the time that as especially women, as their hormones fluctuate, their symptoms, will change as well. Let's talk a little bit about at what point do you believe somebody should even get their hormones checked?
Yeah, that's great. Part of our basic panels, whether someone's a teenager or 80-year-old grandma, it always includes all those hormones we talked about. And it's fascinating because the more you look at things, the more data you get, the more patterns you see, the more you see that, oh, interesting, when you improve hormones, their cholesterol goes down, et cetera. So it's fun to not be, if we go to a functional medicine approach, we don't want to go back to that symptom driven and only check the labs for something that has an obvious symptom associated with it. So we look at them from the start on and don't discriminate sort of based on age, and make the focus, hey, are they optimal or are they conducive to optimal health, whether someone's a teenager or whether they're late in life.
Thank you for that explanation, because I think so often we wait until we can't tolerate symptoms to even check. And so this idea of, well, why not a young girl, which leads me to this idea of I talk about a lot with different guests about how we all normalize our symptoms, or, whether it's, and it doesn't have to be autoimmunity, even just, well, I'm getting older, I should hurt, I should be tired. No. And I know you have an anti-aging focus in your practice, but what is normal? You use the word optimal. And so let's kind of, get into normal ranges, labs, normal symptoms. As a woman,
no, that's perfect.
I was certainly taught that certain things are to be expected, and there's discomforts with just being a woman.
Yeah.
So
you'd be amazed how many ladies, if you ask the question, any issues with cycles or hormones? No, I'm normal, right? And then you ask that 40-year-old, any PMS or breast tenderness or water retention or craving or headaches that are cyclical? Oh yeah, but I've had that all my life. And so there's a tendency that if that's been a pattern from early on, that it becomes, like you said, normalized. And so people don't address it. And they're walking around a good chunk of, it's such a waste when you think of, why have 3-4 days that are crappy days out of the month, and add that over a lifetime or adulthood. It's a waste. And it's something that can be addressed. Your normals are it's an interesting concept, because lab normals are bell curves of a population at large. And so a lab will take all the numbers that are coming in and do a statistical, and we see the numbers sort of shift, depending on what's coming in through the door. One of our labs that we work with, it was funny, last year, the normal range for a postmenopausal woman testosterone went from 4 to 82 to like 4 to 312, because there's more women that are postmenopausal that are using testosterone. And so it's become sort of a thing, and it literally shifted the normal range by several fold, which is crazy when you think about it. So if we think of that's what normal is, and if you come in through the door and you're within that bell curve, you may be told you're normal, you're fine. It's not your hormones. And if you accept that for an answer, then you may not be well served. You may not be addressing the issues. Does that make sense? And so when I think of optimal, then we go, okay, this person may be within the bell curve, but are those levels optimal for them? If that lady is having PMS and breast tenderness and water retention, and she's not feeling well, that ratio is not optimal for her, even though she may be in that bell curve.
I love that. So again, being one of your patients and being a woman in her 50s, I know this is a question I've asked you before, and I want the listeners to know, anybody who, hears this and ends up wanting to investigate their hormones. When you're looking for a doc to support you with hormone health.
Mm-hmm.
I know how you approach it. And
Sure.
to me, and you just touched on it. So I was going to wait until the end to ask this, but I'm going to ask it now instead. How do we determine? I know from personal history that almost everybody is quote unquote practicing hormones now. And it's not necessarily with that optimal approach that you
Sure.
take. So what I hear you say, but I want the listeners to really know, is there's, this, yes, you look at the labs to see what's going on, but you take symptoms into account. You actually talk to your patients and listen to how they feel and what's going on.
Yeah. And it's a tough thing to answer, right? It's like, how do you sift through? Because there's personality there. Sure. You may click with a certain provider and work wonderfully, whereas another person may not. One of the challenges sometimes the functional medicine world is beautifully inclusive, right? So we have all these practitioners from different disciplines, from chiropractors to naturopaths, to MDs, DOs, et cetera, that coaches, and we're all doing functional medicine. And so I guess one of the things to look for is, hey, a hormone, if it's going to be used at a therapeutic dose for someone who's perimenopausal, postmenopausal, in this country is a prescription. And so someone may do wonderful in terms of guiding and how to optimize hormones, but if they can't write a prescription for a hormone, then it's going to be hard for that person to truly kind of potentially help somebody. On the other hand, dietary changes and lifestyle changes can influence hormones greatly. And so I don't want to discount it, but if someone asks me, how do I go to another city and find somebody? I would go, okay, find somebody who can write a script. Maybe ask the question to the office, is the physician willing to address my hormones based on how I feel, based on symptoms? If they're mentally limited to, no, I'm only going to address it if it's in the bell curve or out of the bell curve, then again, it's going to be limited, right? Because once you're quote normal, then, you're stuck. And so that concept of, are they willing to listen, and are they willing to kind of take symptoms, there are hormone panels out there that look at, say, saliva hormones, every day or every other day for a month. And you look at some of those graphs and you go, crap, it looks like a stock market graph with ups and downs. And it makes you realize, shoot, if they come in and did a blood test or a saliva panel or a urine panel, that one day, it may look totally different than 2 days later, right? Yeah. So it's a matter of weighing evidence, right? What that person is experiencing day in and day out, month in, month out, carries more weight than a one-time measurement. It's just, it's just weighing evidence. And so it's not like ignoring science. It's just actually listening to people and addressing it. And the beauty with some of the symptoms is that they're very tangible. If someone is estrogen dominant and you add a little progesterone the week before her cycle, and she has lighter cycles and she's not PMSy and she's not retaining water and her headaches and cravings are better, it worked, right? And you can always look at the levels, but it's how that person responds that makes to me, carries the biggest evidence. So,
thank you. Okay. Yes, that is exactly where I was going with that. And just to really just drive it home, because I did, as you know, see a physician who has hormone specialist on her website who is an MD, so she can write prescriptions, sure. But her treatment approach is just completely different. And I think that's another piece, is the fact that you are focused on optimized health and longevity, and not just, so I'm postmenopausal and I had a hysterectomy a year and a half ago. And so according to some approaches, there's certain hormones I just don't need anymore. Right. And so it's a very different approach than that optimal health. Right.
That's kind of a pet peeve of mine that because traditionally women who've had a hysterectomy, if they get estrogens, they usually don't get progesterone because the mindset is, hey, you don't have a uterus to protect anymore, so you don't need it.
Right.
So, but by doing that, even if we give that woman a bioidentical hormone, if we make that woman estrogen dominant, we're going to increase her risk of breast cancer. We're going to make her gain weight for sure. We're going to just create an imbalance. And it's like, there's a lot more to you than just the uterus. There's hormone receptors in brain and heart. And so it's just one of those things that it's a kind of crazy mindset that, and it's a common thing.
It's a common,
There's
yeah.
lots of ladies out there on estrogen and no progesterone if they've had a hysterectomy.
Yeah, which leads us so beautifully into, you mentioned estrogen dominance a couple of times. And you also mentioned that, there's different kinds of estrogens that we have. So how can somebody, again, like looking at that test, and here's where I fall into this category, probably had I looked at hormones in my 20s, probably in my 20s as well, but I never had high estrogen, but I have been estrogen dominant. So explain what that is, and maybe tie for us to it. And I could be wrong to try to tie this together, but to me, I think of estrogen dominance as at least inflammation provoking, maybe not causing, but so let's dig into that a little bit.
There's something about the whole balance thing, and maybe backing up, if I think of autoimmunity, right? It's our immune system it has this huge tall order where it needs to attack self sometimes, right? You can't fight a cancer, you can't identify an abnormal cell and deal with it unless your body is willing to turn against self. So we need to do that. If we don't, we're screwed on one end. That's
right.
And on the other hand, think of pregnancy. If a woman has a foreign person living inside of her, and somehow her immune system needs to know, I'd leave baby alone. But yet, if she has a little abnormal cell in her skin or colon, that I can attack. So there are things that upregulate and downregulate immune system, and hormones somehow play a role. So going back to estrogen dominance, if you give somebody who has a uterus just estrogen, or if she has more estrogen than progesterone, she overstimulates the endometrium. It gets thicker, her periods get heavier, more crampy, painful. She develops fibroids. She has fibrocystic breasts. She gains weight easier, and weight triggers inflammation. That thickened endometrium is inflamed and can become endometrial cancer. So there's something overstimulating about the state of unopposed or estrogen excess or imbalanced estrogen and progesterone levels.
And that, I guess, is where I tie that in as a very lay person to, when I talk about, well, my clients are always saying their symptoms are worse the week before their period because their estrogen is higher, as it should be, hopefully with progesterone also increasing to create that balance that you were talking about. And so that's kind of where my brain goes when I think of, how is this inflammatory and why? And yes, we need estrogen. And I keep talking about women and cycles, but I have seen also in male clients, and I know male patients of yours that, with either autoimmune expression or autoimmune markers, that they too are estrogen dominant.
Yeah,
so what's going on? Why are men becoming estrogen dominant?
There's a whole big debate.
It's a whole other podcast.
But I mean, we do have this pattern. If we look at data from military recruits and testosterone levels over the last few decades, I look at my practice. It was unheard of seeing a 20-something-year-old with low testosterone. But now it's like we have an enzyme called aromatase enzyme that converts testosterone into estrogen. And that enzyme is more active in visceral fat. And so when a guy puts on some weight, that extra fat starts converting testosterone into estrogen, and that estrogen encourages more fat. And so we too can develop that sort of vicious cycle of what's going on with hormones. The same estrogen, makes prostate swell. The same estrogen affects mood. And, so as a male, we want to look and go, hey, are those ratios optimal again?
So just to, circle back, it's not just women's health. It's,
No.
We all need our hormones checked.
Yes, I agree. But you and I have talked about the idea that there are more, we see more autoimmune expression in women, right? And you're more elegant in terms of what hormones are doing, right? I mean, you're the one that ends up carrying a baby to term. And so in the male, we're kind of simple. We have certain hormones that don't fluctuate a whole lot. And so we guys are kind of clueless and kind of, sort of unconnected to hormones. And a guy doesn't come in the office saying my hormones are changing. A female does, but because...
Or a guy comes in and says, my wife's hormones are changing.
True. But there's something, because you have the cycles, the ability to carry a pregnancy to term, and all those things that are changing, there's more potential for dysregulation. And I think that's kind of part of that connection as to, hey, why is there more autoimmune issues in women? And you and I have talked about this idea of if we're going for optimal, right, then it's the question of, do you feel the way you want to feel? That's often something I ask people, because they go, I can ask, how are you? How are your hormones? People often go, fine. It's better than they used to be. But do you feel the way you want to feel? And, it's kind of interesting when you kind of have that mindset again, that all of a sudden,
where I'm going next.
All of a sudden you're paying attention and you're addressing things. And it can be life-changing if you just accept it and go, oh, this is just part of it. Think of how many women have been told that that's just the way it is, right? And so then you're kind of in this pattern of, I feel shitty, I'm sorry. But I'm powerless, because that's just the way it is. It's the way it's supposed to be. And so it's hard if that's where you're coming from, it's hard okay, now you get a diagnosis of autoimmunity. It's like, oh, one more shitty thing I've got to endure.
Right.
And so there's something beautiful about that journey when someone starts addressing hormones, and the beauty with hormones is typically you respond fairly quickly, right? It's something you can change and sometimes see a change within days. And it kind of clicks something in people's brain that, I can kind of reclaim back my health, my power, I can feel better. And maybe that's why, I love dealing with hormones, because it's something you change, you see results fairly quickly, and it becomes a catalyst to making lifestyle changes, to eating differently, to addressing sleep, to looking for toxins and all the other things that we do that maybe take a little longer. And, sometimes the payback comes a little later, but.
Well, and that this idea of taking our power back is a passion of mine as somebody who stayed way too long in that mindset of, oh, this just is like, this sucks. These are the cards I'm dealt. And, I'm going to decline. I say all the time, well, they told me I would, I believed it. Shocker. I did. The mindset is so beyond important. And so I love that idea of, there is nothing that drives lifestyle change better than noticing something working, right? And like you said,
action,
it really can take, I tell my clients, you didn't get this sick in a day. You're not going to feel amazing tomorrow just because you've changed your diet today, or, but you're right. It's almost a shortcut to that energy and power and mindset shift of like, oh, I did something. If this can change, what else can change? And I want to tie that to, you said it, but I want to make sure the listeners really heard, this isn't just about autoimmunity. This is health in general. I say women's health. I'm sure there are men that could feel so much better if their hormones were optimized and don't know. So they get just as stuck. You may say they're not as in touch with it, or maybe it's not, changing cyclically like a woman's hormone pattern would. But that power can be, and I've seen it with young women, college age women that again were, struggling, but normalizing the fact that they were losing 4 days a month of productivity, socializing, all the good things. And so it makes me excited when I see, a 19-year-old get a hormone panel.
It's true.
Right. And so she doesn't have to take decades and figure it out in her 40s or her 50s because she finally found a doctor who looked or listened. So it is that power. She will probably also never accept certain decline because she was given a diagnosis, because she's already connected those dots. So I love that idea of, I think hormones are one of those things. I have been known, to try to get answers for people quickly. And I know you're very methodical as far as, there's so many rocks to look under and so many areas to address, but you have just motivated me in this idea of, well, if we make sure hormones are dialed in first, it's like a gift, right? You're just giving that little piece of power that's so quick to reclaim.
And maybe it's just like a trick of the trade. It's not that all the other things that are part of it are hugely important. And it's like that symphony, right? You can't just do one and ignore the others. you're totally right. If we pick some things where we make a change and we experience results, you kind of get that buy-in as a doc. If you see someone you've never known, they pour out their heart, and then you make a change, and next time they come in, they're like, oh my God, first time I've had a good cycle. And they're now they're going to listen more to some of the other recommendations.
Doing.
Yeah. And so it is kind of one of those things that it's kind of fun and wonderful when it gets addressed properly. The other thing that we didn't hit on a little bit with, you use the word decline, and it made me think of, once you become postmenopausal, right? Or once you go through andropause, the traditional medical mindset is like, hey, we may use hormones to get somebody through the change, but then we stop them because they're bad for you. They may give you breast cancer. And I always explain to people, hormones do not cause, breast cancer. The breasts are responsive to hormones like estrogen, right? If you lather me with estrogen, I would grow man boobs, is what I tell people. So we don't want someone estrogen dominant because that would increase the risk of breast cancer. But people get more cancers as they age, whether it's colon cancer or skin cancer or breast cancer. So you can't ever tell somebody that if they're on hormones that they won't get a breast cancer. But we know that when people are optimized and they're balanced and they have the right ratios, that statistically they don't have a higher risk. And in fact, they're better off than the people who are not doing anything. That lady who's postmenopausal, who's got some visceral fat, who's making an inflammatory estrone and doesn't have any progesterone because her ovaries can't make it, she's at a much higher risk of breast cancer than someone who has balanced hormones. But tying it to the decline deal, if we just tough it out and don't address the hormones, what happens predictably? We start losing bone density, our collagen goes to poop, you have vaginal dryness and bladder issues and foggy brain and poor sleep. And people tend to think, oh, that's part of aging. Here's a sleeping pill, here's an antidepressant, here's, Fosamax for your bones. And, and we start trying to treat all those things they're not symptoms of aging, because the same 80-year-old, if all of a sudden we address her hormones, her vagina gets moist again and her bladder is better and she's not having as many UTIs and, her bones actually start getting better and her collagen responds. And so it's that idea of optimizing health all the way through. And if someone dies of old age and they're using hormones, but they're active and their brain is sharp and they're planning their next adventure, that's how it should be, not in a nursing home, decrepit and in diapers and senile. And so we want to think of hormones in that context of optimizing health, for the long haul. And the beauty is somehow that magic helps with autoimmunity as well.
I love that. And that's that balance. That's the theme, I think, is the balancing of the hormones and that understanding the difference between certain, the doctor that's going to say you don't have a uterus, you don't need progesterone anymore, and somebody who is, again,
that would be a good telltale sign. If someone says that, that that's probably not the right person.
Yes. I know, this story, but when I had my hysterectomy last year, I was told, ask the surgeon if they put an estrogen patch on you in the OR. And when I asked her, she said, oh, are you already having hot flashes? And I said, no. And she said, well, if you're having symptoms, if you're uncomfortable when you come for your post-op, we can talk about estrogen. And that's that red flag, different approach of why. I mean, we know now my body's not going to make it. Why would we wait until I'm miserable and then treat it in an imbalanced way that's going to drive my inflammation? So balance is what I hear. And when you think of, for me, balance and healing autoimmune symptoms, I mean, it just makes sense. So what do you say what if somebody, maybe hasn't had issues with their cycle and they do have autoimmunity and they're, maybe they're 50% better because they're working really hard doing the lifestyle things. I mean, are they somebody you would still, is it across the board? Should everyone know, what their levels are or if there's room to improve with hormones?
Sure. Part of it is sometimes we don't know what grade is. right? And it's not just
Not
normalizing
sometimes.
bad.
I would say most people
Yeah.
listening to this probably have lost touch with what great feels like, or if they're like I was, they think, well, that's just not for me. That's not possible for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's great to address things that are working, but it's interesting when we look at ourselves in any area of life and go, is that as good as it could be? And again, there's that mindset. But there are areas in my life that I've addressed, not because I felt bad, but then when I addressed them, I went, holy cow, I feel better. And so if we keep that mindset, yes, that's the short answer. I can't think of a reason why we wouldn't, because in the doing so, I don't know how many people I've seen run around with Hashimoto's who didn't come in because they had Hashimoto's, but we were just addressing hormones, and we happen to look at thyroid antibodies anytime we do labs, and it's like, oh, look at this, they're smoldering away, they're asymptomatic, but by addressing them early, we have a much better chance of resolving and getting rid of the autoimmune issue.
It's a completely different mindset. Why don't you stop it before it starts? That's why I love functional medicine.
There are panels that we do that have anti-CCP3 antibodies and things like that are kind of part of the panel. And it's interesting how many people have a viral infection or have COVID or whatever, and their anti-CCP3 antibodies go off the chart. They're not coming in with, swollen joints and a diagnosis of RA.
Right.
But if nothing changes, eventually they will develop it. And those are the people that if you can address their hormones, their vitamin D, their omegas, their whatever the case may be, and you can see those autoimmune issues resolve, it's kind of like, hey, you corrected an autoimmune issue before it developed into a codable disease, which I love.
One of my favorite things. I love that as well. I always get excited when I see markers reverse. Mm-hmm. I had the experience with one of your patients. I hadn't seen labs before we worked together. And then I saw them once he made great changes. And so I didn't even know he had autoimmune thyroid markers to begin with, and to see them correct, mm-hmm. I just get so excited. It's fantastic. One question I ask everybody as we get ready to wrap up is it's not even a question. I ask for a suggestion, one small step, something doable that listeners can start tomorrow to optimize health, since we're talking about optimizing. So what's one thing that listeners can do?
I'm in the spot there. I think the mindset thing, to know, because the beauty with mindset is we can change it pretty quickly, and it's like an aha type of a deal. And so, and especially tying it to hormones, is that mindset of, am I truly the way I want to be? Am I optimal? And if not, to just really have that light turn on and go, figure it out, go address it, measure levels, do what it takes to improve it, because it will be life-changing if you just turn on that mindset and choose to address it. So.
And one thing I usually ask guests that I didn't ask you directly, mm-hmm. although I'm pretty sure listeners could tell just from our conversation, but, do you feel people can heal autoimmune symptoms? Can they, turn things like that around?
Absolutely. And just like we were saying, we see it often, and that's why I like the idea of tracking markers, because not only, it is fun. It's fun to see them go away, and it's fun to clinically see them be able to get off medications that they've been on sometimes for years. Not because the drugs are bad. I'm the first one who would start the drug if someone comes in a flare. But it's not, if you just stop, if you just think of, here's the label, here's the drug, symptoms are okay, they're fine. No, it's back to that mindset. If we go at it with, not that drugs are bad, not that the Western conventional model is bad, it's insufficient for autoimmunity. And if you keep addressing those root causes, and many times you use less and less of the meds, and eventually many people don't need them.
Absolutely. I'm living proof of that. I thank you so much for all of the valuable information. People, get your hormones checked. Please get your hormones checked. And I love the key takeaway, aside from hormones or in addition to, is, we can heal, and that mindset mm-hmm. is, whether you are, in the middle of a flare and just knowing that it can get better, or whether you're already doing pretty well, are you perfect? Are you as good as you could be? So I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity. Did you enjoy this episode? Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to get a transcript of this and every other episode, just head on over to inspiredliving.show or click on the link in this episode's description. There, you can also find everything we discussed in this episode, including links and information about our guest. You can even send in your questions to be answered by Julie in a future episode. That's inspiredliving.show. Until next time, this is Julie Michelson's Inspired Living with Autoimmunity podcast, helping you take your power back.